Hello and welcome to a special episode of the Jams and Tea podcast. Is this a podcast episode? What is? Doesn't matter. So this is a sort of familiar format for our viewers, but on a completely new topic. Today I wanted to do a video on the top 10 games of 2023. As those who keep up with video games know, 2023 was a pretty momentous year for AAA and indie releases both. Just a staggering number of truly excellent games came out in the span of 12 months. But before we get too far into it, I do want to acknowledge the rampant layoffs that have been affecting the video game industry. I just couldn't feel too good about celebrating how great this year was as a gamer without acknowledging that it's been a really tough year for developers. Tons of layoffs this year, and that's a real shame because we're losing so many of the people that made so many of these games. And it would feel weird celebrating without acknowledging that in some capacity. And before we get into the list proper, there are 4 games in total that didn't quite make the top 10, but that I wanted to shout out regardless, just as sort of honorable mentions. First of which is the Souls-like that completely blew everybody away, it seems like. That released late last year, Lies of P. For a little background, I feel like I'm sure I've mentioned at some point or another being a massive Soulsborne, Elden Ring fan. So playing any Souls-like, it's sort of interesting to go in with certain expectations. You sort of ask for a particular level of quality when you play a game that is emulating the people that started and basically also perfected the formula of the Souls action RPG. And to tell you the truth, I haven't finished Lies of P. It's honestly a little more difficult than I would prefer, but don't tell anybody. I mean, it looks incredible, and the art design is generally fantastic, but it's not really so much an aesthetic that's for me, I guess. I sort of wish... It reminded me a lot of Resident Evil 4, not so much the remake, which we'll get to later, but the original, and how it conjures up so many European but gross ideas, I guess. I don't know a better way to say it, really. It has a similar aesthetic to Bloodborne, which is in my top 15 games ever. And it feels at times it hews a little too close to Bloodborne aesthetically. I sort of found myself wishing it would strike its own path in that regard a little more often, and in general I found the combat kind of slow in ways that I just failed to really connect with. Kept me going through most of the game. I think I got to like chapter 8 of 11 or something like that, or at least I have so far, is just the commitment to quality in level design and atmosphere. I think those are really strong aspects of this game, and really necessary aspects to nail for any Souls game. I mean, that's what, if you're struggling with a Souls game and you're just hitting up against a wall of progression, a lot of times what keeps you in, or at least what kept me in, is the atmosphere of something like Bloodborne or the first Dark Souls. That's really what hooks you in enough to want to progress beyond these really difficult bosses, at least in my case. It was less the desire to overcome some great challenge and more just I want to see what else this world has in store for us. And I think that that's something that, while I didn't necessarily connect with it in the overall gameplay, I think Lies of P has that in spades. So, I definitely props to that game. Next, I want to shout out Diablo 4. I did mention on the channel earlier in the year, around launch for Diablo 4, that something to the effect of, this is easily the best Diablo game ever released, or some other such hype fueled, take that I had. I do think it looks and plays better than any Diablo that's been released before. I certainly find it a much more comforting course correction after the aesthetic of 3, which I like, but it's not Diablo, really. So this deep entrenchment in dark fantasy and a commitment to atmosphere, I really found in general really were assets to Diablo 4. The reason this doesn't make my top 10 is just that I put about 40 hours into it across 2 different characters that I leveled. I never finished the campaign, never got to the end game. I just felt content with where I was at in both characters, and I haven't really felt the need to go back to it at any point since. Which, this is not a feeling I've had about the first 2 Diablo games. It's sort of a failing in that regard, I guess. I haven't been able to quite identify why, but I know I'm not alone in this camp, considering the level of player drop-off that Diablo 4 has seen, but it's just not really... It didn't hold my attention past a certain point, for reasons I'm unable to yet identify, but it is what it is, and though I certainly enjoyed the game overall, I sort of just sunk my time in and left. Another game I want to shout out was the surprise release from the beginning of 2023, Hi-Fi Rush. This is another game that I actually haven't completed either. I think maybe if I had at this point, it might make this top 10, although this year's so stacked it's hard to say. Yeah, completely in love with the aesthetic and the idea of this game. I grew up playing the version of Jet Set Radio Future that came in a double pack of a GT racing game at launch for the Xbox, and I grew up playing the Jet Set Radio Future side of that disc over and over in my youth. To have something that sort of combines that aesthetic and musical connection with something like a character action game is really special. I think it's got to be Tango Gameworks' best game yet. And I've enjoyed to some degree basically everything that they've put out since they started. Yeah, just really solid idea, really creative energy in the game. I really enjoyed my time with it, and I definitely want to go back and finish it at some point. But yeah, I certainly couldn't make a 2023 list without mentioning that title. And next, I want to mention Mortal Kombat 1, which this is one that I sort of got to a little late, a couple months after launch. But as someone who's enjoyed every Mortal Kombat game that NetherRealm has released since, Midway fell under and they started over again with, what's often referred to as Mortal Kombat 9, but what was just called Mortal Kombat at the time. I've enjoyed all of those to a great degree, especially 9 and 10. I love 11 and I've put a lot of time into it, but I don't think it feels quite as good as 9 and 10, and granted, I haven't put a huge amount of time into Mortal Kombat 1 just yet, but it already feels a lot better than 11 to just play. I think they've done so much to really polish this as a fighting game in a way that you just sort of want to go for match after match over and over again. It has that addictive quality that the best fighting games have, and I often find myself in that mode of when I turn it on of just going one more match, which is really the best feeling that I think you can get from a fighting game, because that means that everything is sort of coming together in that way of just wanting to keep you playing. So yeah, I think this is really another sterling effort from NetherRealm Studios. Alright, so that's all of the honorable mentions out of the way. So now we can get into the list proper with my number 10, Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon, which certainly takes the cake for the hardest title of the year. It is the kind of title that makes you want to say the whole thing every time. Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon. Like, that's just hard as fuck, bruh. Like, goddamn, it's been a while since we've had a From Software game that wasn't a Souls title in some way. I think the last one was Armored Core 5. So yeah, I was really, really excited to get to Armored Core as a newcomer and, its most polished and high-budgeted format so far, and I certainly was not disappointed. I didn't connect with it in the way that I have with nearly every Souls game, minus Sekiro to some degree. And, that's a little disappointing at first, but the foundation of this game, of this mech combat that plays so fast and so reactive and is so exciting even in its dull missions, really carries the entire game, and it's such sound action gameplay that I can't help but really want to sink my teeth into it every time I pick the controller up for it. I really loved my time with Armored Core 6, and I hope that they continue to make Armored Core games, or, at least expand on this one even further as time goes on. I really hope that they stick with this, as well as developing. I would love to see something completely new from Software. That's really what I hope at the end of the day. Obviously, Elden Ring was a new IP, but that is an evolution of Dark Souls 3, patently. And Armored Core 6 is obviously, not just the 6th Armored Core game, but like the 16th or something. So I really hope that the next thing they come out with is, obviously it'll be Elden Ring, Shadows of the Erdtree, but I really hope that the next game that they come out with, the full game, is just something new. I want to see what they have in store as sort of a new gameplay format, or they could mix and match obvious elements from certain kinds of games that they've been making. But I just really look forward to what they have in store in the future regardless. But I hope to see something really brand new from them sometime soon. At number 9 we have another fighting game, Street Fighter 6. I came to Street Fighter pretty much as a newbie. I had heard that Street Fighter 5 had gotten decent at some point in the years after its release, so I think I got that on sale at some point, and liked it, but didn't really click with it in a way that I found really satisfied that itch I had for a really quality fighting game. And God almighty, did Street Fighter 6 ever scratch that itch. I mean, it feels like an embarrassment of riches that this, probably the tightest and best controlling, most accessible, most high skill ceiling fighting game that I've played in years, it feels like an embarrassment of riches to have on top of that like a Yakuza-esque, almost open world RPG single player mode tacked onto that. So yeah, this is really one of the best packages of the year, I guess, in terms of most cohesive and most entertaining, most content-filled, and every aspect of it is really high-quality content packages in this year in gaming. I mean, this is if you love fighting games, you already have Street Fighter 6, let's be honest. Even if you don't love fighting games, I think Street Fighter 6 in particular is really geared towards getting its teeth into a newcomer and really encouraging them to sit down and sink some time into it, and really getting a lot out of its, easy to learn, hard to master gameplay. I certainly felt that as a newcomer to Street Fighter, but not so much a newcomer to fighting games. This was the one that really, really sunk its teeth into me and got me to play, as I said with Mortal Kombat 1, that in that mindset of just one more match over and over again. Yeah, I cannot talk highly enough about it, and I cannot talk highly enough of what Capcom has done with themselves over the last 5 or 6 years. Really starting with Resident Evil 7 and continuing on a streak of some of the best games that I've ever played in my life. They've really been on a roll, making just a number of incredible titles, and I can't commend that enough. And that certainly shows no signs of stopping, with Street Fighter 6 released last year, and Dragon's Dogma 2 looks really good. I'm really excited to get my hands on that at the end of March. So there's tons to look forward to as well. At number 8, we have the Dead Space remake. As soon as I heard that there was going to be a remake of the first Dead Space, I went back, and I think they were on Game Pass at the time. I went back and played both Dead Space 1 and 2 for the first time, about a year or so before this remake released, and really enjoyed my time with both of them, but one especially. It felt to me like the idea of Resident Evil 4, that sort of that hybrid of action and horror and survival horror gameplay, really honed to a really fine edge. But a lot of what kept me at a distance from it was sort of, if you're someone who's a really big fan of the first 2 Dead Space games, particularly the first one, it might be a little annoying to hear me go, yeah, the thing that really kept me at a distance from it was the lighting. But it really was. It suffered from what a lot of console games in the mid to late 2000s, the 360, PS3 generation, it suffered from what a lot of those games have suffered from, in that just everything, all the graphics were so advanced that they want to light everything and show it all off as much as possible. And it's led to a lot of titles from that era sort of aging poorer than they should, because everything's so overlit that you can see how much better graphics have gotten in the interim. And I certainly think Dead Space, more of the first one than 2. I think 2 is a much better lit game overall, even if it sacrifices some of the horror atmosphere to become a more sort of Resident Evil 5-esque, almost action horror experience. The point is, I enjoyed both of those games, but really just had my socks knocked off by the Dead Space remake, with how committed it was to staying true to the spirit of the original, while also expanding on it, fixing things both in quality of life and in like level design, and the light. Oh my god, the lighting in this game! I could kiss whoever is the engineers behind how this game looks. Not just in terms of how incredible the graphics are, although obviously they are incredible, but whoever sat down and said, we really need to have this as dark as possible for as much of the game as possible, because that's really what is so key to so many great survival horror titles, is just keeping you in the dark and keeping you in suspense and knowing when to turn up the action and when to turn up the atmosphere in separate parts, or when they do mix them together successfully as well. So yeah, as a survival horror fan, this has been the best year for survival horror, maybe the best single year ever, but certainly in the dry period of like after Resident Evil 5 to now, where we've basically had no real survival horror games that really scratch the itch of like PS1, early PS2 era Silent Hill or Resident Evil. And now, except for obviously the Resident Evil 2 remake, I would say that's the best survival horror game ever made, and I think is largely responsible for the uptick in both the uptick in both remakes in general that we've seen, and the sort of resurgence of survival horror as a really exciting genre that people really want to sink their teeth into. If I say sink your teeth into in this video one more time, please reach through the screen and punch me. It's just a really exciting time to be a survival horror fan, and there was no better way to kick off that sort of return to form with the Dead Space remake. I really, really loved my time with this. At number 7, we have one of the most hotly anticipated sequels of the year, Spider-Man 2, the follow-up to Insomniac's PS4 exclusive Spider-Man, and naturally Spider-Man Miles Morales, which was a PS5 launch title. Loved both of those games. The first Insomniac Spider-Man is one of the only games that I've ever taken the time to 100% complete. I didn't do that with Miles. There's not really any reason in particular, but I felt that I had put the time into that game and really enjoyed it, and just got what I needed and left, which is my attitude with most games that I love. I certainly have not come anywhere close to 100%ing the top 3 on this list for this last year, but I did in fact go through and 100% Spider-Man 2. In terms of negatives, I guess, or overall drawbacks, however few there are for Spider-Man 2, at least in comparison to the first one, which I did like more overall, that's still my game of the year for 2018. I would say that I found the open world activities a little less enjoyable, but really especially I found the story less solid overall. Just as emotional in parts as the first one, but really sort of the construction of it was a little more ambitious, and it that hurt it as much as it helped it in some cases. It takes a lot of influence from like 90s Spider-Man, and it's just not really an era of the character that I'm super in love with. although I certainly think this has the best version of a lot of those elements. But yeah, overall, in terms of the gameplay itself, it's a really strong refinement of what the first two games were doing, and I think the combat is more engaging. It's a little more difficult in spaces than either of those games. Yeah, I loved this game. I loved playing through it. I wish it was a little longer than it is, even after 100%ing it. But yeah, I just really enjoyed my time with it. I couldn't say enough good things about what Insomniac's been doing in general over the last handful of years. And I just really look forward to what they have in store for us next. At number 6, we have Star Wars Jedi Survivor. I know a lot of PC gamers in particular were really unhappy with how this game turned out. I certainly can't begrudge anybody that, but I did play it on PS5 at launch, had little to no issues with it. Not only is it an improvement over basically every gameplay aspect of Fallen Order, a game that I really enjoyed, but it felt a little formulaic and derivative for my taste in terms of a game in this sort of Souls-like adventure 3D Metroidvania type genre. I thought this is an absolute head and shoulders improvement over that. In terms of gameplay as well as the narrative, I mean, I was just completely in love with the direction that they've taken Cal Kestis in, and this is certainly the most excited I've been since I walked out of the theaters for The Last Jedi. But yeah, Jedi Survivor, I can't say enough good things about this, and I'm thankful to be in a place where I could enjoy it to its maximum. Unfortunate as it is for a PC launch. And, that is one of the caveats to having this be owned by EA, and to have Respawn under their thumb. A lot of games like these come out sort of half-baked on certain platforms, and it's a damn shame because I think this is an incredible title. I certainly would recommend it to any Star Wars fan I know, but really in general just recommend it to any action-adventure game fan that I know. It's really great stuff. Alright, so we're in the top 5 now, and we're kicking that top 5 off with what at the time was my most anticipated release of the year, Final Fantasy XVI. As ever with any Final Fantasy release, but especially a mainline numbered title, 16 has seen its share of controversy and impassioned debates about, whether or not this is even an RPG or whether or not this is even a good game. I don't really, as someone who's been a Final Fantasy fan since, I picked up Final Fantasy VII in, 6th grade or something, I've never really taken much truck in any argument about what makes a Final Fantasy game. I find that kind of just being really limited in what your view of a Final Fantasy game should be, I find really annoying. Especially considering how much the series has willed itself to evolve over the course of its lifespan. Not just in the numbered titles, but in the spin-offs as well. How consistently the franchise is willing to become a different form of RPG, or sort of forego the RPG elements, or at least lighten them up enough in certain aspects. But I find it so annoying in particular around 16 because it gets away from what this game is, which is, one, the best character action game since Devil May Cry 5. Go figure, considering the developers and who worked on the action in this game. 2, just a really deeply compelling and richly developed story that unfolds over the span of about 45 hours. That's how long my playthrough took me. It's just, the characters are so well developed, and they're so well portrayed by their voice actors and motion capture artists. I think those are often the same people, but regardless. Even over Baldur's Gate 3, I would give this the nod for voice acting and motion capture performance of the year. I was so completely sold by everything that the game had going on in it, and it still crosses my mind as many months have passed, nearly half a year since its launch have passed, and I still find myself thinking about, the ending and certain character moments, really in the way that every great Final Fantasy game has lingered in my mind. You know, for reference, my two favorites are 9 and 7 Remake, so that tells you a little bit about how wide the margin is for how much I will enjoy a Final Fantasy game, because those two couldn't feel more different in terms of the gameplay. And this is Final Fantasy 16 is certainly up there in terms of my favorites. Yeah, really cannot say enough good things about this, and you know, I think it's really an incredible achievement for Creative Business Unit 3 and the team that runs under Yoshi P. Going from what is the most popular MMO in the world right now to a really strong, focused single-player title. You know, I think they've done really, really incredible work with Final Fantasy 16. I can't say enough good things about it. Next up on the list at number 4, we have the Resident Evil 4 remake. As I said, Capcom has been on such a roll with every game that they've put out in the last handful of years. I was particularly fond of Resident Evil 8, which actually took my Game of the Year for 2021 and still holds it. I've played that game in particular, 3 or 4 times now, and just loved it more every time. I think it's such a unique marriage of what Resident Evil 7 was doing and what the original Resident Evil 4 did, which I think actually, as a huge fan of this franchise, I've always kind of failed to really connect with the original Resident Evil 4, so I was really excited at the advent of a remake for Resident Evil 4, because I think, you know, as much as people love it, as it's heralded as one of the greatest games of all time, certainly revolutionary for video games, I failed to get on board with a lot of what was going on. So a remake sounded absolutely perfect to me, and to say that this delivered in spades is an understatement. I have put, you know, I think my PlayStation timer has this at around 75 hours in, you know, about this 15 to 20 hour game, you know, just to give you an overview of how many times I've played and replayed this, either on New Files or on New Game Plus. I found that at a certain point around this launch and, you know, the couple of months between that and Tears of the Kingdom, I really did not want to play anything other than Resident Evil 4 after I had finished it. The Resident Evil 2 remake certainly had the same grip on me, and I still do narrowly prefer the Resident Evil 2 remake overall. But 4, I think, is such an achievement. It's such a deliberate and honest focusing of what worked about the original Resident Evil 4 and what didn't, and was so committed to improving the things about it that did need improving. Because, you know, I think honestly they could have gotten away with just doing an absolute one-for-one remake of the original, and, you know, just with updated graphics and motion capture and voice performance, or even not even voice performance. It could have just kept the original actors' performances from the original title and released it to just as much acclaim as this remake has gotten. I think they could have gone the easy way with that and just been so faithful to the original to a fault. I think Capcom showed a lot of initiative and sort of bravery with tinkering with something that a lot of people find perfect, but making it even better. I think this is empirically an improvement over the original, and not in a way where, you know, I think I certainly like the Resident Evil 2 remake more than the original Resident Evil 2, but, you know, I see a lot of arguments for the original, and I understand those, and they make sense to me, and I love the original Resident Evil 2 nearly as much as the remake. This, to me, is a little bit more like the Resident Evil 1 compared to its remake. I think there's, like, just no reason to play the original of either of those titles, either Resident Evil 1 or 4, now that these remakes exist. It's such a head and shoulders improvement over what it's remaking. And, you know, if that was their goal, to be extremely faithful to the original but just polish it and tighten the screws, make everything about it sing, absolutely mission accomplished. In the majority of years, this would be Game of the Year for me, full stop. I think any number of the last handful of years, except maybe 2020 when Final Fantasy VII Remake came out, I think this would be Game of the Year. But, you know, that's how incredible this year has been, is that this is number 4 on that list, and it's just fighting head and shoulders with these next 3, because it is really hard to pick. That leads me perfectly in to the disclaimer that these next 3 games, I feel that a different one of them is Game of the Year basically every day. They're all so interchangeable to me in terms of how unbelievably high quality they are. how impressed with everything I was with everything that they were doing. These are the 3 titles that I was just completely head over heels in love with this year. And starting that off at number 3 is The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. Around the time of Tears of the Kingdom's launch, me, Jake, and Zach did a big old tier list ranking of every Zelda game, basically. And this landed in S tier then, and it lands in S tier for me now. Still probably my second overall favorite Zelda game. And that's as someone who, like, the first game they ever played when they were 4 or 5 years old was picking up a GameCube controller to play the port of Ocarina of Time. That's how long this franchise has been in my life. And I still, accounting for nostalgia, I think the last 2 Zelda games are my 2 favorites in the franchise. That's how towering an achievement that both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are. I really can't say enough about how in love with just being in the world that I am in these games. I mean, really, that's the only thing that sort of holds Tears of the Kingdom back for me in comparison to Breath of the Wild, is that I just prefer the more slow pace, more atmospheric approach of Breath of the Wild in comparison to Tears of the Kingdom, which has so much going on mechanically, and all of it is so compelling and entertaining at every moment of gameplay. But it is a little, just in comparison to Breath of the Wild, I think it is a little much sometimes. But that certainly doesn't stop this from being one of the finest video games ever created. I think, that's the level of territory that we're in where I can say that about a game, and it's only my number 3 of the year. Yeah, I mean, enough has been said about Tears of the Kingdom. You don't need me banging on too long about it to really get the gist. As a lifelong Zelda fan, I was absolutely enamored with it. So I won't bang on about that too much, but I probably will be banging on about Alan Wake 2 for years and years to come. Alan Wake 2 is my number 2 game of the year, the runner-up for this year, I think. Although, as I said, ask me tomorrow and it'll be a different answer as to what my number 1 and runner-up is this year. I have almost been a fan of Remedy for as long as I've been a fan of Zelda, funnily enough. I remember getting a demo disc in Xbox Magazine that had the first Max Payne on it, and just playing that demo over and over again until I got my hands on the real thing, and have played both Max Payne 1 and 2 all the way through innumerable times, and I was a really, really big fan of Alan Wake as well. I think time has not been as kind to that game as it has for Max Payne 1 and 2, even though on the surface the Max Paynes are a little more dated, but I think Alan Wake just doesn't have quite as solid a foundation as those games. And, for what it's worth, I haven't finished either Quantum Break or Control, but I did enjoy my time with both of those. More so Control, I think, was a really creative and intriguing first-person shooter that, for whatever reason, just couldn't completely hold my attention. I think Alan Wake 2 is it's in line with my number 1 game of the year, in that constantly, over and over again, while I was playing it, I had the thought that this is a sort of miracle title. Nobody thought that an Alan Wake 2 would ever come out. There was a 13-year gap between it and its predecessor. When it was dropping hints of a sequel in the DLC for Control, and even, outright confirming that these characters are all set in the same universe. That was really exciting, but I just couldn't get my hopes up for an Alan Wake 2. So to finally have that not only arrive, but be the most important, fully formed survival horror title, most impactful, most sort of revolutionary, I think, in terms of the narrative, most important survival horror title since the original Resident Evil 4, for it to show up in that form, I was completely, and I remain completely over the moon about this game, and I look forward to the expansions. I'm looking forward to getting back to the New Game Plus mode that they've added on. The narrative on this game, man, it's so genius. There's no other really word for it. It's really singular to Remedy, and I think it's their finest work yet by like a country mile. There is absolutely nothing like this game on the market, not even the first one or American Nightmare. The best thing I can say about Alan Wake 2 is just that you should go play it and see for yourself. It's a little, people use the term walking simulator a lot, and I don't think that's accurate at all. But it certainly is slow, and it's a slow burn until it ramps up into how viscerally insane some of the moments in this game are. The best thing I can do is just tell you to go see for yourself how great this game is. If you're a horror game fan, you probably already played this, but if you haven't yet, if you're a horror fan at all, but you don't play games very much, I would recommend this to you. I just want as many people as possible to experience Alan Wake 2, because it's one of those moments that's kind of like, it reminds me a little bit of when the first Last of Us dropped, where it was a sort of watershed moment for the way that narratives can be created in games and affecting how, wildly emotionally affecting they can be, whereas Alan Wake 2 is just as revolutionary as The Last of Us in that front. It really doubles down on just how creative and inspired a video game narrative can be. Again, there's just absolutely nothing like it. That's number 2. Number 1, extremely predictable, especially if you know me and know how much I've been banging on about Larian Studios for the last couple years, ever since I played Divinity Original Sin 2 for the first time. Outside of just knowing me, this is basically everyone's game of the year, with, some, obviously it's not everyone's, but it came out of nowhere. It felt like to completely usurp Tears of the Kingdom as the most immense achievement in video games in 2023. And as a fan of the wave of modern CRPGs that have come out in the last handful of years, this is again a game that feels like an absolute miracle that it even exists. Not to mention how high budget, how committed the designers were, how committed voice actors and writers were, how excellently it adapts Dungeons & Dragons 5e to the video game format. It feels like a game with not only an unbelievable amount of money and time put into it, but an unbelievable amount of love and care and craft put into it that, even as someone who is actually a little disappointed by it, that's mostly just the fault of expectations, because Divinity Original Sin 2 is in my top 5, maybe top 3 games ever, and this fell just a little short of that, mostly because I don't love Dungeons & Dragons 5e being adapted into a game format so much. That's really my only hang-up to it, is that I just find the combat of Divinity a little more satisfying. In every other aspect, this is one of the most important games to ever release, I think. Just in the sheer quality that can be achieved when you give a development team who really cares about what they're doing the time and budget that they need to make something that really resonates with people. And I think that's, aside from all of the technical wizardry and the amazing achievements that it takes to create a game at this caliber and release it basically perfect on day one. Besides all of that, the reason that this game is the mega hit that it is, one of the highest rated games ever, one of the most well-loved universally games ever. That's not a sentence, but you know what I mean. I think the reason for that is just that these characters, Shadowheart, Lae'zel, Astarion, Will, Gale, Orin the Red, for fuck's sake. These characters resonate so much with people, and being able to have their stories told through the most dynamic, reactive role-playing game ever created is, it's a moment that you wait for as someone who plays video games, but almost dare not ask for. It seems too much to ask of any studio to make a game that is this whole, I guess. But, lo and behold, Larian Studios have done it. They've made something that I like, even if it's a little disappointing for me as someone who loves Divinity so much. It's impossible for me to really fault or argue with. It is just that incredible of a title that if you play games, you should absolutely have to at least give this a chance, as someone who is a fan of the industry and keeps up with it. I think, you have to give Baldur's Gate 3 a try at least. And if you don't fall head over heels in love with it, then that's your prerogative, obviously. But, it's such an important moment for what we all love so much in this medium, that I would encourage anybody to try it, you know? Because you are likely to find something that does resonate with you, even if you don't love it enough to really bring it over the extremely long finish line. I've still only done one run of this game, and that took me about 80 hours. Although I certainly will be returning. I'm especially really excited to see the epilogues that they've added, because that was something I wasn't absolutely crazy about when I first played through the game, is that the endings felt a little slight for how grand an adventure you had been on with all of these characters. Everybody has sung the praises of Baldur's Gate 3, and you know, I will happily join in on that chorus and have it as my game of the year. And a year that was absolutely stacked with competition. You know, this came out on top, and it's come out on top for a lot of people. Larian's maybe the GOAT, you know? They're in that space that CD Projekt Red occupied after The Witcher 3 came out, where it's like, nobody working right now is really close to touching what you're doing. And let CD Projekt Red be a cautionary tale in that case. You know, I would urge Larian to, as much as they can, just continue in the vein that they were working in Baldur's Gate 3 and not sort of squander it by rushing a launch or encouraging really weird and bad business practices like certain studios have done. So yeah, thank you for watching and sticking with me through this, you know, not exactly long video, at least in comparison to what we do on this channel most of the time, but you know, thank you for watching. You know, I don't know how to do outros. I'm not in charge of this. It's really extremely satisfying to sit here and discuss these games in the absolutely incredible year that we've had for video games. And just, you know, to look back at the list and all of the incredible work that's been done. It's really enjoyable to be able to celebrate that in this format. And I thank you for watching, and thank you for watching the channel in this year in general. It's been our most successful year by a margin that's really difficult for me to even process. We're at like 17,000 subscribers as of the time I'm recording this, and that's unfathomable to me. Yeah, it's been a really special year for us here at James and T, and I look forward to branching out a little more in the video game direction as the year goes on. It's going to be another really exciting year. You know, we're already having our first great game of the year with Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, which I've played the demo of and absolutely loved. I can't wait to get my hands on that. Yeah, what a year, you know. It's been, you know, confusing and difficult in places, but at least we have some absolutely incredible art to fall back on. And I can't thank you all enough for sticking with us through all of it. For everyone that's joined on in the last 12 months, you know, thank you for hanging out with us, you know. And, you know, if you made it this far into this video, you a real one. I love you. I see you. Thank you. And until next time, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago. EA Sports. It's in the game.